Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the National Sports Forum Spring Summit Sponsorship Workshop. My name is Todd Bynum with the Golden State Warriors. I am honored to be co-leading today's session with Dan Kaufman. Hey there, Dan.
Hey, Todd. Appreciate everything. My name is Dan Kaufman. I'll be co-moderating with Todd here. I'm with the New Orleans Saints and Pelicans. I'm the Director of Global Partnership Sales and Strategy. Over the next hour or so, we're openly discussing multiple topics. We're gonna have some legends here. I think, in my opinion, no pun, Sean. Talking about new and emerging categories in sponsorship space, evolution of partnership opportunities, value digital, and more.
Yeah, so as Dan said, we obviously will have the pleasure of hearing from some guest speakers and subject matter experts during the panel today. However, the goal of this workshop is to truly provide conversation and open dialogue. So please don't hesitate to submit a question or two via the chat function on your screen. We will do our best to track incoming questions throughout and ask them of our guest speakers. So without any further ado, I'll kick it over to Dan to introduce our panelists for the day.
So I'm going to do this in alphabetical order. Our first speaker is Mr. Ryan Connors of the San Francisco 49ers. He's director of sponsorship sales. Known him over 10 years. He's 9 years with Learfield, 4 years as a seller. I remember he started out as a account executive and rose all his way up from AGM to now be the GM at Northwestern Sports Properties. His first partnership job was at the Toledo Walleye and Mud Hens. The guy's from Ohio, from Youngstown, went to Bowling Green State University. Joined the 49ers right before the 2019 season. So he's had a fun run here over the last couple of years from their success. And his job is he manages the partnership sales team. Next is another gentleman I've known for many years, Mr. Sean O'Hara at Legends. He grew up outside Philadelphia. He went to UNC undergrad and went to Ohio U for graduate school. His first job was at Intersport, and his first sales job was actually in Learfield at Illini Sports Properties. So I got to meet him there as well. He spent 8 years working with the Philadelphia Eagles and the Las Vegas Raiders, including opening this building. It's pretty good. It's Legion Stadium. So he was one of the gentlemen that did a lot of the founding partnerships in Las Vegas. Currently, he's the vice president of global partnerships for Legends across their multiple portfolio properties, including Notre Dame, Caesars Entertainment, FIFA, Pinstripe Bowl, LA 28, Team USA. And finally, the man, the myth, the legend of Will Searing. I've known Will, again, many years now. Will joined the Thunder as a vice president of partnerships in 2018, and he leads the organization's business strategy to optimize sponsorship sales and brand activation. Before that, he was 5 years with the Chicago Bulls as the global manager of business, and he worked with multiple sales strategies in international markets in China, Poland, Germany, Mexico, Finland, the Philippines. Prior to the Bulls, he was at Learfield Sports at University of Tulsa, where I got to meet him, and at Oregon State University. He's a graduate out of Wisconsin, Eau Claire, another Wisconsin guy. I got to know him for years. He resides in Oklahoma City with his wife, Leslie, with their son, Wilder, I can't believe he's 3 already, and their daughter, Laker, who's 1, which I can't believe that we're all growing up. But I kind of got a question for the first panel. Connors, I'm going to start with you. What was your first sponsorship sales deal that you did?
Yeah, so Dan, we shared the Toledo connection. I was selling for the Toledo Mud Hens. My first sale technically was a program ad. I was selling some program ads for the Mud Hens game day program. But my first true partnership was with a company called Hawaiian Pools. They built custom pools in backyards in the Toledo area, much like the one Will has in his house. We had a Hawaiian theme night with the Mud Hens. And so I took that platform, that opportunity to Hawaiian Pools, thought it had some natural synergies, and I was fortunate enough that they bought in and became a partner.
Mr. Sean O'Hara, I got to hear your first deal, man.
Yeah, man. Well, still in the travel business, I guess. Not Hawaii, but I'm thinking of Amtrak. So I worked in Chicago and was representing Champaign, and think the common theme sometimes is always not always trying to do a partnership deal that makes sense from a dollar figure, but also a trade figure. And so we were trying to find ways to supplement the cost of my travel back and forth. And so we connected with Amtrak, and again, we started the property about July, heading into football season. So it was the quickest deal I did. And I was like, oh, this is going to be great. Like, all deals will be just, a month to 2 month long. But that's when I came to learn that partnership sales is a longer sales process, but it was a fun run and one I'll always remember.
And finally, bat and cleanup, Mr. Will Searing.
Thanks, Dan. Well, first off, I just want to say thanks for putting this panel together. You and Todd have done a great job circling the wagons, and this group on this call. I've known every single one of you for at least a decade, some of you much longer, and deeply respect everybody here and excited for the conversation today. First sponsorship sale, there's a little bit of a story to it. So my first job in sports was working for the Kilsyth Cobras in Melbourne, Australia. And the way I got connected to that group, I had a chance to study abroad my senior year of college at the University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire. And I fell in love with Australia. I fell in love with the people, the sports, all the opportunities that Australia presented. And so I wanted to go back. And so I flew home and finished up school. My college roommate said, look, I know you're looking to work in sports. I've got a friend that runs a basketball team in the south part of the country in Australia. You should call him up. So I gave him a call, and he said, look, I don't have any internships available, but I do have a game announcer position open. I said, that sounds good. I'd be happy to do that. So I flew over there. My grad present was a one-way flight to Melbourne, Australia, and interviewed for the game announcer position, got it, and realized quickly that being a game announcer is probably not my career path, and met somebody selling sponsorships. And I said, what's that? And he said, look, if you want to make some money and you want to work in sports, sponsorship is it. And I said, that sounds good. And so he said, grab the phone book and start calling local companies. And so the first sponsorship deal I did was with a company called Michelle's Sewing Basket for $3,200. And we gave away a sewing machine on a half-court shot in front of a crowd of about 1,200 people inside the Kilsyth Cobras Stadium, which was the SEBO League, which is the development league for the NBL. So it's very similar to the G League that we have here for the NBA. And it was a one-page contract, and I have no idea if they renewed it. But that was the first deal that ever closed.
I like it. I don't quite have as good a story as Will does, but for me, mine was when I was back in Michigan. I did a local doctor's practice deal to sponsor a charity golf tournament that I was working on. I was with an agency at the time that we were hired to sell sponsorships for a variety of smaller scale events, such as this golf tournament. So local doctor's deal for me. How about you, Dan?
Mine goes back in the day. I was actually in Pensacola, Florida, for the AA affiliate of the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Pensacola Ice Pilots. And I just getting into this very young. And my first deal was actually with Enterprise Rent-A-Car. And they came to us, and they were using rent-a-cars for coaches and players and everything. And it was a first leverage business deal that I did. They had dasher boards, and we had the seat upgrade. Because back in the day, it's like, we'll pick you up, and we had Enterprise people come in and pick you up. So that was my first sponsorship deal many, many years ago.
I like it. Great stories all around. Appreciate everybody just giving some insight into how we all got started in the industry. I love it. Like Will said, we're really looking forward to today's conversation. Dan mentioned we've got a variety of topics that we're going to chat through today, but let's jump right into the actual first topic. First one being the evolution of the industry as a whole, both from the property perspective as well as the brand perspective. Start with saying, the world of sponsorship used to be potentially much clearer than maybe it is today. Brands would seek after opportunities to simply get their name out there. And, in some instances that may have simply been throwing a logo up on a wall and calling it a day. As we all know, things have changed since then, of course. And that's not quite the model that we see now. On the property side, separately, the sports team was simply just that. It was just a sports team. That's all they focused on. If you fast forward to today now, brands now have the opportunities to invest with these sports organizations to do so much more than just that traditional sport, if you'll call it, whether it be on the entertainment side of the business, esports, event activation, so much more. So my first question to this group today is, what sort of evolution have you guys seen within the space in recent years, both on the brand side as well as the property side? And why do we think this evolution was a necessity? Will, if you don't mind, let's start with you.
Yeah, look, I think you could go a lot of ways there, and to your point of how brands are looking for more than just the event. There's a couple of folks on this call that can speak more directly to that, but I think the old spot and the dot went away a long time ago. I would say a decade ago, maybe more than that we used to be viewed as simply an advertising platform. Now we can be considered a marketing platform, a workforce development platform, a hiring platform, a community engagement platform. And so the wheel of sponsorship has expanded to be so much more than simply brand awareness. And I think a majority of our deals now include a workforce development piece. They include a community engagement piece. They include, of course, the brand awareness funnel. They might include a hospitality and entertainment funnel. That every deal you do, it allows you to look through a lens and go across and sit across from a CEO, C-level executive and say, look, I can add value to not only your marketing team, but I can add value to your HR team. I can add value to your IT team. And so that's how we come into a conversation. We go into a conversation with a partner, and I think that's been the evolution over time, is that it's really evolved to sponsorship being something much bigger than a brand awareness play, and something that an organization can look at and say, we can move the needle here and pull multiple levers to get the value out of this deal beyond just our logo during the game. And I think that changed a long time ago, but I think the pandemic proved that these deals, these sponsorship deals, mean so much to the community. They mean so much to staff. They mean so much from a workforce development perspective that it almost became an essential part of the toolkit for these brands that realized when all you had at sometimes were signage, that the value changed. And if you had a deal that was just signage, it was exposed during the pandemic, because everybody on this call, that's all we had for quite some time. And it became challenging to deliver that value back. And now that we're back to fans inside of our venues, it's in our events, it's proved that you've got to make sure you're leveraging all parts of that funnel cross-functionally across the organization and our own organization to make sure you're maximizing value for our partners.
Yeah, I think to add to that, I think that was one of the things you talked about, Will, when we caught up numerous times during this challenging time for all of us, was just how you looked at the bright side. It was making us better, right? And taking our assets and thinking about, okay, what can we be doing differently? And so many companies today, are struggling with that great resignation and kind of young millennials really wanting to connect to brands that stand for something, that mean something. And so I think thinking of our venues, I think has been a huge change of just outside of what game day looks like. What are we doing with our venue and our spaces and our teams and organizations to maximize the revenue that we can generate by bringing in other experiences? And I think because of COVID, everybody's much more interested in getting that experience. And so if it means, hey, I'm not only going to bring out the C-suite, and you're always usually thinking of, okay, I'm going to build a partnership and a package that's focused on just the VIPs. It's no, how can I get this entire organization, 500 people here for a day for an event? Because that's what's going to make a difference and keep that employee engaged for another 2 years and on board versus them job hopping and going to the next one.
I hate to use the word, but it seems so overused sometimes, but I feel like brands nowadays are truly trying to find authenticity in the partnerships that they're looking at, right? And like we said, from the storytelling aspect, that's a big part of what they're wanting to do, depending on the partnership. And, Sean, what you just mentioned as well, like I know obviously you at Legends, you guys get a chance to work with a wide variety of brands. Have you seen over time, the brand obviously, evaluating a potential partnership, but those objectives have likely changed and evolved over time. How have you seen those partner objectives evolve?
Yeah, I think they evolved tremendously. When you think of looking at lower.com, initially, they were on the hype of mortgage, right? Where mortgage is growing, and you look at mortgage interest rates now. So it couldn't be only focused on just the mortgage rate, but it was really evolving on, okay, what's our culture? How are we going to be building towards it? And I think to your point of like storytelling and authenticating it, it's like, that's what I think the best teams do is working across function of our departments. I think we talk about this group, right, is sponsorships, and the beauty of what we do touches everything within our organization, like whether it's ticketing, whether it's community relations, it's the production. And so I think the better that you become integrated, right, and having those conversations with those departments and saying, okay, what is your challenge, right, and understand what those challenges are, and like how long do you need to solve that challenge, so that your partnership team can then go, okay, wait, this is a great story. A brand could really benefit from coming in and doing something to provide this benefit for a team. And when we did that with the Columbus Crew in Veritiv, they were a data and analytics company that was headquartered in Columbus. The Crew needed better IT and infrastructure in setting up their new building, as well as just building out their team. And so part of it was not just selling a partnership, but really a solution that could then help the team from a business operations standpoint.
Yeah.
Todd, I'd add, in addition to the authenticity piece for brands, I think the last thing I'd point out is just the importance of scale and reach, right, and impact with these partnerships. So at the grassroots level, tapping into our ecosystems, with you, Todd, I look at what you've done with Thrive City and all the real estate around the arena. And with us, it's 49ers Fit, our gym concept in San Jose, or 49ers Cal High, which is a high school sports show. But then on the global side, right, so you kind of have those grassroots community things that our brand partners can tap into. But then on the global side, when you look at like the Niners, with what we're doing with Leeds United and Elevate, it gives our brand partners so many more options that they just didn't have when we look at things just through the lens of the team and the brand and the event.
And just from our side, now being in New Orleans now for the last 2.5 months, we're trying to do honestly what Ryan's doing. We're looking at different platforms to tap into different fans. And one thing is how can we differentiate our properties with those brands in multiple different facets, like what Will said. That's where in sponsorship, I think that's our differentiation factor. I think that is where you can have an exclusive relationship and really hit multiple viewpoints instead of just, okay, we're trying to sell product or service X, but hitting all different facets within the business, from HR to recruitment to retention, for employees, for stakeholders, for vendors. So that's where we're going. We're going deeper and wider, just in more different facets from our end. For the next question, and this is where I love to hear your guys' perspective, and this is where a lot of sellers are coming in. They're looking at different areas. What are the new up and coming categories you guys are looking at? I would love to hear your guys' perspectives of, you got 2 in Silicon Valley, you got O'Hara around the world, and you got Will Syrian, who knows what Oklahoma City's doing. But I'd love to hear your guys' perspective on what type of categories you guys are emerging right now that you guys are looking at toward, not right now, but in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
Well, I think you gotta let Syrian tell the Bulls story about his dipping into the international bucket, because again, he was a little bit ahead of his time there. But go ahead, Will, kind of share that story, and just because I think the international piece is such a big piece on all of our horizons. At one point in time, it was just only a few leagues really had international rights. Now you see the NFL extending it. You're seeing other teams extending it. More games are being played internationally. I think that's where a lot of people are going. But Will, I'd love to hear you share that with the group.
Yeah, no, I think new categories, like we're always looking for new categories. Like that's the bread and butter of sponsorship sales. If you're not looking at new categories, your business ultimately dies. It just is. And so if we were having this conversation 22 years ago, we'd be looking at new categories. In terms of the international piece, because that has, to Sean's point, has really opened an opportunity up for NBA teams to capture more dollars. And I see what the NFL is doing too, with more international games and expanding rights into Mexico and Germany and London. I think it's fantastic. But, in Chicago, we leveraged our IP in ways that it was a little challenging, because at the time you didn't have IP rights to sell internationally. But we knew that a majority of our audience watching our games or following us on social media were in markets outside of the US. Like we saw the data, we saw the insights. And so there was clearly an opportunity that was being left on the table that we weren't monetizing. And so I went to my boss at the time and said, look, I think there's an opportunity to tap into some of these markets. Let's see what we can get. And frankly, we stumbled into some opportunities. And one of our first ones with it was a Polish exchange company, a currency exchange company based out of Zielona Góra, Poland. Well, the second largest Polish community outside of Poland in the U.S. is in Chicago. And so there were some synergies there between both groups, and they were looking at opening an office in Chicago. And so that company, Chinkchas.pl, which is still a partner of the team in Chicago, signed a 7-year deal, which I believe was back in 2015, to be the first international partner of the team. Now, they didn't have rights to activate outside of the U.S. I think that deal and several other deals that were on the table that the Golden State Warriors and Todd and Mike Kitts and your team put together, what John Crowley and the Houston Rockets were doing, what the Brooklyn Nets had put together, some things that the Knicks were doing, were really helping to drive the league to say, look, like, I think there's opportunity here. Can we ultimately unlock this? And they did. And in the first trial was, we had 3 slots that we could sell to international partners, and now it's up to 10. One being your jersey patch partner. And so it's unlocked a plethora of opportunity to monetize the global following of the NBA. And I think that conversation started, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, and it has really excelled over the last couple of years. And so I think from a category perspective, you're looking at your opportunity. It's much larger when you can call it international brands within the same company, the same category, and carve up lanes for each. So it's been really helpful for the NBA clubs to monetize their following.
But kudos to you. Again, I think that's such an important part for everybody that's getting into partnerships, is just the data point, right? Like that unique data point and being able to connect the dots and tell a story. That's what our job's all about. And so, it's amazing to, again, hear how those things come together. And you're right about everything's a new category. I think other new categories that, we've been trying to tap into and explore, I think, of just e-commerce, right? As we looked at e-commerce and logistics, you look at what's happened during the pandemic and those industries really just going up to another level, and thinking of logistics beyond just your traditional shipping, right? Thinking of, okay, so it's not just UPS and DHL, but who are these companies that are basically putting all these products in place around the world? And there's such a good synergy with sports and logistics of a story that you can tell in terms of how, whether you're talking about basketball and how, again, the team moves the ball up and down the court, soccer, football, the synergies there that you can play into that. And then again, as we talked at the front end of the call, it's like, okay, then how can it serve VIP, recruitment, and all these other areas? But those are some of the things that we're looking into.
Another one I'd add, that's obviously relevant a little bit in California, but I think it's going to be a huge category for everyone moving forward, is green technology, sustainability, tons of subcategories underneath that. You look at like electric vehicle and electric charging. You look at what the Biden administration is doing with incentives in that space. So I think you're going to see a lot of prospects that we don't even know about, a lot of companies in subcategories, as Will said, they're just ever evolving. I think you're going to see a ton of those emerge over the next couple of months and years, to be honest.
I think your point on sustainability, and I'll pass it back to Todd. I'd love to hear what you guys are doing, Todd, at the Warriors, but like that was a bread and butter for us at the Eagles. It was go green. It was putting, solar panels and wind turbines on the roof. And I think looking in your organization, and most Fortune 500 brands now, right, are saying, okay, there's a global, climate issue going on right now. Like, how can we be more sustainable as a company? And if you can find a way to build a story beyond just the threes and trees and other things that you can do with a company that maybe you do together, I think it's really going to be a big part of partnerships moving forward.
Yeah, it's well said, Sean. I think one of the things that's been most exciting, at least from my perspective in the last couple of years, has been the ability, and also potentially the challenge, depending on what you're looking at, is the separation of the categories, or I should say the segmentation of the categories, right? Because you look at, like, use cryptocurrency, for example, right? Like, that wasn't a very big thing several years ago, but it still is technically within financial transactions. And so how do you look at that from a capacity standpoint in terms of how are you looking at the financial industry and category as a whole? How does cryptocurrency fit within that? How does fintech fit into that as well? And so a lot of the things that I think brands and properties are looking at nowadays is like, how can we be strategic in our approach as we look at these categories, right? One other thing, I know this wasn't part of our initial list of questions, but would love to get you guys' thoughts on it too. I think one of the areas which, may or may not be necessarily a sponsored category, but things that organizations are looking to invest in is the world of NFTs and fan tokens and those sorts of things. What are your guys' thoughts on that as a whole for the industry?
Look, I think it's no secret that, the NBA and lots of leagues have now started to come around to the idea of looking at fan tokens and that particular topic. It's not something that is formally approved at the league level yet. We can do deals with fan token companies like Socios. I think we all know those folks well, and those are brand awareness plays. We're not selling a token now. I think the empowerment of the fan is at the base of that. That's kind of the root of the conversation. And so if you start with that and you're starting to understand that fans want more, I don't want to say equity in a club in terms of, I mean, real equity. What I mean is they want to get more out of their relationship with the club. They want to get more out of just going to a game, buying a jersey, buying nachos, buying a drink, going home. Like they want to be able to vote on what music they hear as they walk in. They want to be able to vote on what color jersey the team wears on a particular night. And I don't think those things are difficult. I think those things are something we've always done through surveying and fan insights and data. But now that there are brands and there's technology, the blockchain technology that allows for fans to feel more connected and to vote, quote unquote, in a certain way. And I think brands like Socios and others, have positioned themselves well and showed that it's worked at some other clubs. And there's also sometimes it hasn't worked. And so we're taking a very measured approach as a league and as teams to make sure that we're doing the right thing, that we're following the right protocols, we're asking all the right questions. And I think the teams and leagues are doing a great job of managing that. But I do think it's an opportunity that could be coming down the pipe that would empower the fan even further. But I think that's kind of the root of what we're talking about on the fan token piece. In terms of NFTs, and that's an entire different conversation as well. But I think that also goes into fan empowerment because you're asking for, what can I utilize this particular NFT in the future? What am I going to do with it? What utility is it going to provide versus just flipping it on a particular website to make some money? I think that if we start to see that narrative play out and we start to see that become more of a utility use, and some teams have done a really nice job at that. And I think that's what you're going to start to see. It shifts from just brand awareness play, NFT, flip on a site to, can this be a true utility to move the needle forward for the fan and for partners?
You said the word 3 times, utility. And that's where I think this is going to go. I think I'm like, why is this? But I think of really separating different types of fans with different experiences and let them be part of the process of just the team and be a stakeholder within the team. And what can that NFT do to get you that access as a fan? And I think that is kind of fun. And I think that's something new just to think about engagement. But again, what Will said, and I cannot fully agree with this, is, yeah, you guys will do a utility. I mean, we'll do a sponsorship deal with an NFT company, but what value or utility does it bring to our organization in multiple facets?
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, obviously hearing, your guys' thoughts on all these emerging categories is great. Just hearing from different perspectives, different leagues, different agencies. One thing that came to mind as we're chatting through this is, are these opportunities things that are feasible for any and all sports organizations? I think we all want to find the right partner, but how do properties, do that based upon individual markets, right? Ryan, you, for example, being in the Bay Area, I'd imagine some of the partners that you get a chance to work with in the Bay Area are very different than perhaps the ones that Will does in Oklahoma City. And again, it could just simply be a product of the individual market. So I guess the next question for the group is, when you're looking at that, how do you create your strategy around, I guess, what we'll call, localized category maximization? Ryan, if you don't mind, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think it's really important to maximize your category potential. You look at what the Niners were able to do when they opened the stadium as a really great example of how to do that. I think the strategy at the time was probably just not to make the categories too broad. There wasn't an official tech partner, an official cloud partner. If they had done that, they probably would have been handcuffed and also just not allowed a lot of partners to get involved with the brand in the new stadium and the opportunities that came with it. So I think now what our strategy has evolved to is not to push the envelope with those current tech partners. I'll use tech again as the example, but not to push the envelope with their categories and their respected exclusivities. It goes back to what Will just said, is where are the new categories? Where are the new opportunities? We have a saying with the Niners, bring your own category, BYOC. So I think from a strategy perspective, that's really the strategy, is to keep your eye on what's coming and just make sure you're not restricting you, your team, your organization in terms of what opportunities exist, especially when you're in an area like Silicon Valley.
Well, I think you guys have one of the best naming rights, right? I mean, who else is getting significant dollars from a clothing company to have naming rights? I mean, it's a great story, but that's also being strategic, right? If you would have made that Cisco Stadium, that would have wiped out your tech deals, So I think thinking about that from whether it's your jersey patch and some of these big partners, it's like, okay, can you monetize that category just by itself without using a big asset to bring them in? So I'll turn it back to Will. I think you guys have to do some great work there in OKC.
Well, Ryan and Sean, it's such an important point, for those on the call that are at particular properties or working in category maximization on that term, because it is different and you have to be strategic there, because when you're staring at a deal that is large and it's a long-term one, that can be enticing. But you have to think about, how does that, Ryan's term, handcuff you? How does it restrict opportunities in the future? And that's really tough, because you almost have to predict the future. And it's a bird in the hand. It's right there. You don't know what's coming in. And so but you really have to try to carve out lanes. So, in our world, it's no secret how important oil and gas has been to this market since we got here in 2008. Some of the biggest companies in the world in terms of total revenue was headquartered right here in Oklahoma City and in Tulsa. And so one thing that we had to do is to make sure that even though we had a naming rights partner at the time that was a drilling company, we had to go to them and say, look, y'all got to play in the same sandbox together. Because if you don't, we don't survive. It doesn't work. And so we were able to get 6, 7, 8, sometimes 10 energy partners in at a time, carve up particular lanes that allowed whatever their goals and objectives to shine, if you will, while still competing with others in the same space, because we're the only pro team here. And to be direct, we can't miss. And so one thing we always talk to our sales team about is, if there's a large company that's here, or if there's a company that's moving in here, build a relationship quickly, because we can't miss that. We can't. They have to be a hospitality account at least. They have to be a partner at some point if there's an open category, because in our market, we don't have many Fortune 500 companies that have the ability to invest in the size of partnerships that we need in order to keep our team viable, to be fair. And so that's something that it's all relationship based, because in this market, everybody talks, as they do in a lot of markets. But if you do the right thing, and if you're treating our partners right, then it helps grow your entire business, because they all understand that they're in this together to support the team and support the community versus competing for ad space. And so that's largely been our positioning here.
That's again a great point that you brought up, and I want Kaufman to talk about his and how you guys thought of banking. But when you talk about swim lanes, I think that's so important for people to think about. It's like, let's not just bring the same type of story and activation to every single person in the category. Let's literally come back and brainstorm and think of, okay, what's different, what's unique, where can they be, give them that shine, but still allow us to do different things, versus it being like, okay, we got 5 of these partners, we're going to put this one on this club, this one on this, and then call it a day, So, Kaufman, how you guys created and thought about the whole you're in the financial capital of the world in New York, and how you guys thought about carving that up was really amazing.
So yeah, there's 2 different ways I look at this. So I'll go through when I was at the Jets of how we carved up the banking financial category. We looked at it as, 3 to 4 different partners within there. So we had a community bank / retail bank, which, you guys have Wells Fargo, we had M&T. We had a private bank with Bank United. We had a commercial bank with a different bank. I can't remember what that was. And we had a credit union as well. So all four played in a different sandbox and had their own lanes. But the one area I really am going to look at local category maximization, I'm going to use what I did in Wisconsin, and I'm going to use kind of what we're going to do down here is I look at like what Rockefeller did with oil. And so what do I mean by that? When I was in Wisconsin, you know, number one dairy producing state within the union, California's up there, New York's up there. I literally broke it down from farm to fork of how the dairy process went. And again, I'm from Arizona for the people on the call. I didn't know anything about dairy or agriculture or anything like that. So I had to really learn what that process was. And so, you know, I learned that people are on the tractor trailers. They're listening to Packer Sunday football and Badger Saturday. So started looking at, okay, what do they need to create feed? What type of seeds do they need or feed they need for their cows? What type of nutrients they need for their cows? What type of insemination products do they need to obviously birth calves to make more cows? To look at milking machines, to looking at tractor trailers, to looking at also crop production. So I literally went in and I did every part of the process to even also the Milk Marketing Board, who's a current partner now. And that's how I really looked at local category maximization. So for example, in New Orleans, what we're looking at down here, and Will, me and you are going to be aligned on this, is really looking at the whole process of oil and gas, from refining to transporting to then, you know, the retailing part. And then when we look at transportation, you know, in this region, New Orleans has the two biggest, you know, up there, the ports, and all the railroads come in and all the shipping comes in from South America. It's one of the biggest ports. To then looking also ironically at agriculture. So I think you're looking at transportation, agriculture, oil and gas. And the other final part of this for you guys to think about too is also what type of events are happening within your region. So for example, you know, major storms come in the Gulf South, hurricanes, you know, this place has been, you know, hit by multiple hurricanes in the last few years. What happens with those, you know, products and services that need to be aligned with the right message for when people are in need? So that's where I'm looking at local category maximization. So I look at more of a, you know, the whole process, and that's where you get multiple different partners within the same category.
No, I appreciate the context here. We did have a question come in from the audience. Appreciate the submission. Please continue sending those in. We'll plan to address all of them at the end of the session. But moving into the next category, I think, Dan, you were going to chat through data analytics.
Yeah, no, I think data is very important. I was working on literally when I was getting my doctorate is about taking data and how do you tell that story. So this is for the panel and for everyone here is, you know, us as being in selling centers, we're trying to obviously generate revenue for our properties. You know, when you look at buying centers, what qualitative and quantitative data are useful to those buyers? I want to know what your process is, what your resources are, and what you see fit. Now, we know that, and here's my caveat, each buyer center is totally different from one another because they're looking for different data, but I'd love to see and hear your process of that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think it goes back to the demands of sponsorship that, it, you know, as these deals, frankly, have gotten more detailed, larger, more integrated, that there's more eyeballs across an organization look at something. They all demand, what's it mean for me? Right? How does it move the needle? And how it moves the needle for the brand awareness team is totally different than how it moves the needle for the HR team. And so we look at data holistically. And so we've got a strategy group internally led by Will Idam, and who will try to, in any single renewal, any recap of a current partner, any new prospect, using their goals and objectives first. How do they think about data first? And then coming back with either case studies or insights related to our fans based on what they're trying to accomplish. So as an example, you know, we just met with our healthcare partner, OU Health, and OU Health was going through some rebranding starting in 2019, and they were replacing a legacy partner. So a partner that had been with us, Integris Health, had been with us since the beginning. So for 10 years at the time, that deal went away, was replaced with OU Health. And so they wanted to know, over the past 3 years, where are we? How do we rank against them, not only in brand awareness, but in favorability, likability? Would you use us versus a competitor flat out? And so we came into that meeting at the highest levels and presented from the strategy group, here are some data points. Here are things that we know based on our internal surveying, our external surveying, that's YouGov, Nielsen, others, on where you rank on all those KPIs, all those data points that you want. And we showed it in slides, and they were blown away that this partnership could do a qualitative and a quantitative direct ROI for the things that they were measuring over 3 years, versus here's your QI media value for signage. Here's how many people attended the game. Here's how many people went. It started with the end in mind. It was the end results of brand awareness, favorability, likability, usability for a healthcare system. And so that helped justify the immense spend that they invested with the team to move the needle for their particular group. So that's just one example of how we use that in a current partner situation.
Yeah, you couldn't have said it better, Will. I think, especially in Silicon Valley, we lean in heavy to data. You got to make data-driven decisions. Our brands are seeking that. I love what you said about you need to first identify what the brand's objectives are as it pertains to data and how they're going to measure the partnership overall. And so I think the other thing is leaning into your strategic partners. We use YouGov, Nielsen, all those MVP index on the back end, right? So obviously that's going to tend a little bit more quantitative, but even though we can pretend to be experts and have these resources, leaning on them, they truly are the experts. They're going to be the ones to best tell the story, and having them engage with our partners, not just taking their data that they provide and sharing it ourselves, inviting them to calls and having them break out the results and the measurables and where there can be improvements, and being transparent through that process as it pertains to the data. I think that's really key, and that's what our brands want to see.
I think a key part you brought up, Will, is just you're talking about current partners, but as we just talk about the sales process in general, right, is you're initially doing the research for the data, right? Any company that's publicly traded, you got their annual report. You should be going there, reading that, consuming that, understanding that environment before you even pick up the phone and call them. And then once you have the meeting, that fact find is so important to say, okay, how are you measuring success? What is the data metrics that you're using so that you can work with your team to figure out, okay, do I have a solution currently that can help speak to that from a data point perspective? And then if you don't, it's like, okay, we got to find other metrics to come back with, right? And I think Brent Shobe always told me about this. It's ROO, right? It's not on a
Well, Sean, we lost you to mute.
Sean, you're muted, man. You're muted. So.
Speaking of sustainability, you have lights that go on and off all the time.
Yeah, you've been struggling there.
I think Sean and Brian, you both just want to comment on, the return on objectives is so important, because Ryan, your point of, and I think we frankly could all probably do this a little bit better. Our partners have a lot of data. These are very complex organizations that we think it's this big part of what they do, and we position it that way, but it's largely a small sliver of their day-to-day. And they're running large marketing groups or CPG analyses or workforce development metrics. Like, we need to be asking our partners for data too. And that's something we've started to do is go to partners and say, share with us, like, what are you hearing from the market? What buying behaviors are you seeing with the local grocery store? Who's coming in, who's coming out? Local casino, who's going to the casino, who's not going to the casino? Because that for our brand, we need to be in front of that group too. And so I think we want it to go both ways, that we're going to share some insights on how this partnership works, but we also want to know, how are your consumers consuming your product? Who do you need to consume more? And frankly, help us get in front of that audience too, to drive ticket sales, brand awareness for ourselves. So I think we ask the question both ways to make sure that our partners are sharing the data that they have, because it can only help us make a stronger deal together.
Yeah, we just got a question come in that's relevant to the topic right now, so I figured we'll ask it to the group now. The question is, what are the specific data points or analytic points that you consider to be most important?
Why don't you start us off, Todd? What at your organization at the Warriors? What do you guys look at as the most important?
Yeah, I think Will hit it right on the head earlier. When we do the favorability studies or brand impact studies, we've seen a lot of success in that as we're looking at our partnerships. And I'll be completely transparent with you. It's something are fairly new to. We haven't always done that, but we've seen a lot of success in the partnerships that we're doing it with. And the one thing I'll say too on the Warriors side of the business is because of that success that we saw with some of those partners, we kind of did a test run with it. We're now building that into new prospect partnerships. You know, as part of that conversation as we're having with prospects, like we're chatting through like what is the long-term success in their eyes for this partnership and how can we help amplify that for them. And so we're using data in a wide capacity of ways. And again, the brand impact studies, I think for us is one of the better ways that we do that. We still do all the traditional stuff like the QIMV with Nielsen and a few other folks like we all mentioned, but we've seen a lot of really great results from the impact. And I'll say this too, the impact study, sometimes the way that we do it at least is we do one at the start of the season and we do one at the end of the season so that we can see the progress throughout the course of the year, because we've had, numerous activations going on throughout that year, community events. And so we want to be able to see growth, of course. But I think even if it's a potentially negative result, I think that's still a good thing because that allows us to take a look at it holistically in the off season and find ways to be better going into the following season.
Todd, I just want to say how that is fantastic. That last what you just said, because I think setting expectations at the beginning, because you'll run into a buzzsaw. When you say, hey, we'll share how we're going to share the brand lift, we're going to show all these data and metric points at the beginning, and that data point isn't good at the end, if you aren't prepared for what you said at the end of your statement to readjust the assets, look at it through a long-term lens, that deal walks away so fast. It's over. And so I think setting expectations on the beginning of knowing how are they going to measure success prior to sharing that we have all this data and insights, because frankly, some people don't care about that. And so I think if you have that conversation at the beginning to say, how are you measuring it? And what are you doing with this data and what data do you want to see will help you and prevent that buzzsaw from ruining the potential future deal. But Don, I thought that was a great point.
Yeah, agreed. I would say one of the most powerful sales tools, and I think we'd all probably agree, is a case study. So as you look at a new business conversation, sure, we can pull a bunch of metrics and data pertaining to your business or to the Niners or to whatever, but showing a past case study that's relevant to any brand or prospect, I think is maybe more impactful than anything we can communicate, over a Zoom or in person.
Yeah, I would just echo that. I mean, in our business with naming rights, you're talking to companies that traditionally aren't sponsoring teams. And a lot of these companies are like, okay, is this something that I want to get into? And we have a document and data thing called the Naming Rights Index, and it really compares what the S&P 500 has done versus what has companies that have invested in naming rights over the last 20 years have done and their growth. And the difference maker of that to say, okay, yes, this is a risk that you can take because you don't know where your business is going to be in 20 years. But here's the data point. Here are the other companies that have done this, and here's how they've actually proven and beaten the S&P 500. And having that kind of ability for CEOs to understand all these different Fortune 100 brands that are invested in that space from a case study perspective of here's what they're using it for, here's why, especially for these aspirational brands that really want to get into being a Fortune 100 company. That's something that their C-suite, their board, all are going to lean into is, okay, well, if this many companies are doing it and, some of them are doing even multiple stadiums, then this is a space that we could probably invest in.
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot, obviously, about how the importance of brands and properties using data to talk through the partnership element, if you will. And the next topic I want to bring up, I know we kind of hinted at it a little bit earlier, but I think data is also a really important piece that's being used on the property side and the league side to evaluate the growth of their individual brand too, but not just on a national landscape, but also on a global landscape. And so, Will talked about it earlier as an example of the NBA recently announcing, plans to expand a brand's ability to activate team sponsor marks internationally. And like we said earlier, that international growth seems to be picking up a lot of steam, not just within the NBA, but with other leagues as well. And so, again, we'll be kind of quick with this one since we talked a little bit about it already. But I guess the question for the group is what does that opportunity mean for the teams and the brands specifically that are trying to take advantage of this opportunity? Sean, you obviously work with a lot of global partners. Would love to get your thoughts on just international opportunity as a whole and its strategy.
Yeah, so I think there's certain sports that are gaining more market share into the international space. When you're talking about FIFA, it's the largest sporting event in the world. Over 51% of the population's tuned to it. So if you have a company here in the U.S. that's going, okay, I could partner with any of these teams that, again, are expanding, especially with the likes of the NBA that's truly international. But if I can partner with this and make an impact globally, it's really impactful. But I think the key is figuring out, it's almost like a two-way street. It's like for the teams, right? There's a value add because it's like, okay, I'm getting to tap into this international audience. Is there somebody that's coming back and forth between that marketplace? Is there a way for me for that audience to impact my other partners, right? So thinking of the casinos and working in Las Vegas with the Raiders, we found a unique stat that 1 out of every 10 travelers to the U.S. goes to Las Vegas, which, again, think about that. If you went to Las Vegas and that was the only place you visited on your trip to the United States, what your mind would be like. Unbelievable, right? But think of the power for that for a brand going, okay, wait a second. 1 out of every 10 international travelers is going through Las Vegas. Okay, so this can be not only a domestic strategy for us, but this can be an international strategy. This can have value there. It's now we just need to, again, figure out the tactics and the programs that we're going to put in place to really measure against that and deliver on that. But I think the international space is, again, continuing to evolve. And it's interesting, too, when you think of brands really have to have that global aspiration. If you talk to a brand that, isn't really interested in that global audience, they may look at that as, oh, well, that's great. You have that much viewership there. We don't operate a business in that country. And so there's that wastage kind of conversation that can come up. So it's feeling how to navigate, but that's some of the things that we're experiencing.
Yeah, Sean, I think that's well said. And I love that data point, by the way. And Todd, I think your group does a great job of this too, because international can be a bear. If you think about how hard it is to just sell sponsorships in your local market and how you have to have a strategy there, and the number of companies that are in San Francisco, the number of companies in New Orleans, the number of companies in New York or anywhere. Think about that opportunity now globally. So if you just send your 4-person sales team to say, go get international, it's over. Good luck. So you have to find out where are your connections of opportunity? What's your scope going to actually look at? And so a lot of times it's player driven, in the league level. That for us, Josh Giddey, who's an Aussie, and so of course we're talking to every single Australian company you can think of to engage with us to leverage that connection, because we know people in Australia are now following us. I wouldn't do that if there wasn't necessarily a connection, because I don't think that would lead to a success. And you've seen that in a lot of NBA deals that have unlocked some opportunity in the international space, that it's largely player driven. It's team performance driven too. And the success you've had obviously builds a larger audience internationally. But I think having a very strategic, focused either country or location tied to current player activation gives you the best chance to succeed, because otherwise you're just going to be calling 1,500 companies in random countries based on your following, and you probably won't get there. So I think having a very specific audience to go after is helpful.
Well, and one thing to add to that, Will, I think I love that mindset is also thinking about what we were talking about earlier, is looking in your backyard. What is the localized nature of the businesses in your backyard? So knowing that you're in oil and gas, who are these international companies that want to work with those oil and gas companies, right? How can they use the Thunder as a way to get in front of them, knowing how big their business is, but whether it be, again, hospitality, branding, and all those other things that are important. That's, I think, the other part is just tapping into an earlier comment. It's just what is our city known for, and what are the things that really make it work that, again, these other companies could be leveraging.
Yeah, I think that's what we're looking at international too, is first and foremost, start with your current partners, right? Exactly right, Sean. Do they have operations in those countries? Do they have an interest in those markets, and taking unique opportunities to them first and foremost? But Will, you nailed it too. I mean, and Dan knows it probably through early dealings with the Saints. I mean, you don't just get a market. You don't just start going global, turn the light on, and it works. There's definitely going to be an educational process. So the thing I would add, as it pertains probably more so to us in the NFL, there's not a lot of NFL players, obviously, of international descent. So one way we're looking at it is influencers. Who are the influencers that are Niners fans, right, or NFL fans that you can lean into in those countries? In UK, for example, it's soccer players, right, football players that we can lean on that have huge followings and then can influence. And then you start building your fan base that way, and then engaging with them in meaningful ways. And that's when the commercial opportunities are going to blossom. They're just not going to happen overnight. So it's definitely a long-term play. It's going to take some time, but we're excited. The upside, I think, will far outweigh, kind of the short-term pain, if you will, or short-term struggles. I don't know if you want to add to that, Dan, but that's what we're
Yeah, no, it's just, we'll kind of looked at it. Right now I'm down here, we're trying to figure everything out. Right. And so, from players, from where our social following is coming from, but we got to find the right strategic partners. I think us just going out and randomly calling, but that's what we're evaluating right now down here is what countries we're looking at, where's our following, where's the culture make sense. If we go to France, do we play in Paris some regular season games or exhibition games? So creating that following, and I was to create that linkage based on the culture, on players. And that's what we're trying to figure out right now. Is just, really figuring out who can help us, who can work with us. Because, and Will, you nailed it right in the beginning. This is a bear. Because how much time and resources does your property want to go into internationally? And then look at the end of the year, how much revenue was brought in or how many fans were acquired. So we're looking at this on both different sides. On the NFL side, we don't have international rights, but obviously on the Pelican side, we do. So that's kind of where we're at right now of figuring out the right strategic partners and then what countries and areas of focus we're going to have.
That's great. In the interest of time, I know we only have a few more minutes. I would love to jump into some of the submitted questions, if you guys don't mind. One of which is the NFL and MLB adding jersey patches for their respective next seasons. NBA, MLS already having them, and the NFL having practice patches. Brands will have a lot of opportunities for such a valuable asset. How are you approaching that process differently than maybe a traditional sponsorship? And what are the good properties doing that will rise to the top? I'll open that up to the group.
I think I'm curious for Will and again, Dan, from what you know from your days, and Todd, just being the NBA being like the first major league of the Big Four to do this. But I think, one of the things that at least I've seen or heard from is just the nostalgia, right? So if this is the first time someone's going to be on a uniform or a patch. And so if you're an organization that's been around for a long time in a marketplace, it's playing into that and playing into those brands that are there in that marketplace. Unless you're, again, call it a top 5, top 7 team in your league, it's really looking back into your marketplace and going, okay, this is an iconic moment, a first of its kind type of thing. And you want to be the first person to have this opportunity. And because it's so different from naming rights, where you're not asking for a 10, 20-year commitment, you're asking for likely a 5-year commitment. Most CEOs and CMOs can justify that and go, okay, well, look, our business is growing. We've got a 5-year plan. We can do this. We can afford this. So I think the nostalgia part and being first, but I'd love to hear you guys, knowing that you guys have worked with a number of brands. And again, you've had a great success, Todd, with Rakuten. Would love to hear from you guys.
Yeah, well, and Sean, well said. I think first off, it's two things. One, and you do this, Sean, with naming rights, you're one of one, right? You're the only logo on that jersey next to the apparel partner. That was the nostalgia piece of it. And the second piece is you're also the only asset that travels with the team. So every single memory from an event perspective, you're a part of. And that's every social post. It's every single broadcast. That's the sale. That's what you're going to a brand with. In terms of the question of what's the impact of other leagues and providing these patches, I love it because that means it works. And so when you're sitting across from a marketer and you're seeing these brands that are investing tens of millions of dollars in a tiny little logo, they're either all crazy or they know it works. And I'm going to bet that we're on the work side because on if you look at the data from a sponsorship investment standpoint on the league level for teams in the NBA, almost all, with the exception of a small few, have been renewed or extended or sold to new partners for more money. So once with this 3-year trial ended and now it's extended in perpetuity, that means that the value we delivered in those 3 years of those partners exceeded expectations, or a brand saw there's so much value there that I got to have it from the current partner. So the asset works, and the other leagues realize that, and the marketers realize that too, because frankly, we wouldn't put an asset on the table to buy if a marketer wasn't interested. Like it doesn't make any sense. So seeing these other leagues do it, love it. I think it's fantastic.
Excellent. A couple other questions came in. One from the audience is, how is everyone leveraging social in new ways to grow value for partners and expand their reach? And then are social assets becoming more valuable to partners?
Yeah, I think we all made it's a great question. I mean, I think we all made huge strides during COVID. I think we'd all agree our industry totally adapted to the changing landscape. We kind of hit on it a little bit earlier. So I think you look back at last year when none of us had fans, and we evolved any in-game asset or deliverable, including signage, into basically social and community impact. So, I mean, with other things, but primarily those two things, right? So I think we got better at social as a group. I think our brands are benefiting from that, which is a great trend because yes, the short answer is it's probably one of the most important things we sell, and we have to monetize it that way and value it that way. And it's scarce, right? We don't have a lot of it. It does take a lot of bandwidth. So it is a premium, I would say, with most of our clubs, if not all. So yeah, that's how I would answer that one.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Ryan. And I think, look, it's evolved from what's social and how do we use it to slap a logo on an Instagram post to integrated content storytelling.
Yeah.
And so much more, not just sweepstakes and releasing content on your channels. I think it has to be consistent if that's what the partner's looking for. But, simply slapping a logo on social isn't going to move the needle, because the reality is, and to Ryan's point, it is scarce. The reality is that most of our fans all on this call, and for Sean, the properties you represent, will not attend an event in person. I mean, 98% of our total ecosystem never comes to Paycom Center. And so when we go into partners and say, who do you want to reach? Where does your business function? Where are your consumers? Where are your constituents? They're largely probably on their phones. And so that fact alone is now a requirement for sponsorship. Otherwise, you're leaving value on the table. And so I think for us, it's a piece of the puzzle we've had to have for a long time. And to Ryan's point, we're all getting better at it. But I think the content integration, co-branded storytelling is important, because you're just going to scroll through a logo. And although that's a part of the storytelling, you do have to make sure that you're sharing actual content with partners on those channels to make sure you're moving the needle.
And I think to add to that is just people are fans of teams, right? They want to be connected, and social has done that. Versus, again, yes, I may be interested in the NFL, but I'm not following the Shield. So as I think of brands that really want to invest, it's their investment and their tie into that team, and just that infinity circle that goes around in terms of the emotion of the brand and how that lifts the community and how the community lifting up the team. It's just a huge aspect of our business. So finding creative ways to build content. I think that's the biggest change from a social standpoint, is really working with your partners to literally create content versus them saying, okay, yeah, we're going to slap a logo on something. Like, let's figure out something that's really cool and engaging that ties in your brand a little bit and can be done tastefully, not like a Hulu commercial.
And the evolution of like sports technology. I mean, there's so many good evolving companies that are doing this and doing this so much better than the teams in a lot of ways. And so leaning on them to put together, as Will said, the next generation, the next gen social platforms and content engagement is exciting.
Well, listen, this has been a lot of fun this last hour. Great conversation. I think great topics that we've all had a chance to chat through. Want to take a moment to just thank everybody who's listening in for joining the sponsorship workshop today. And definitely a special thank you to each of our panelists today. Will, Sean, Ryan, can't tell you how much we appreciate you guys taking some time out of your day to chat through some of these items with us. So thank you guys.
Thank you. That was fun. Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. All right. Well, we truly hope that, again, everyone listening in was able to take something away from the workshop today. We hope to see you all back in the next portion of the forum later today in the breakout sessions. Thank you again to everybody, and have a wonderful rest of the day.